Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our thought leadership session. My name is Tristan Bassett. I'm a director in AECOM's Buildings and Places Infrastructure team and account leader for the Environment Agency, who I've worked with for nearly 20 years. Over the next hour, a panel of experts will discuss and debate different ways to effectively leverage data to inform better decision making and how innovations and technology are helping the industry tackle the many challenges it faces. So let me introduce our panel. First of all, we have Paul Wilson, who's the AECOM digital lead for Europe and responsible for AECOM's digital services and internal systems. We also have Tristan Harvey-Rice, head of AECOM's cost intelligence team, providing analytics services to project governance and controls processes. David Philp, who's director of digital strategy and innovation at AECOM and digital impact director, Construction Innovation Hub. Stefan Jones, morning Stefan, AECOM Development Director in Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Construction Software. We have Andreas Galatulis, AECOM Data Science Director with broad experience of enabling empirical data-driven decision-making in multiple industries. And Reece Tyler, who is the Head of Efficiency and Benchmarking in AECOM's Cost Intelligence team. I'm also pleased to welcome this morning our special guest, Martin Paver, who's the CEO of Projecting Success, which offers training and consultancy in the application of analytics to improve project delivery. Martin's going to be with us for the first 15 minutes, so Martin will make the most of you while you're here. Thank you for joining. So we have a few questions today to get the discussion going, but hopefully our panel are going to have a nice free-flowing discussion and debate and share their views and opinions and inform the audience. So I'm going to start though with Paul Wilson, and Paul, just simply to kick us off, what do we mean when we talk about data and being data driven?
Yeah, no, thanks, Tris. So one of the things that that the industry has been doing a lot and traditionally, so traditional processes and ways of working is very paper driven, very Excel driven. But what we need to do is think about data. It's not just about what we write down, what we do. It's not just about models. Data forms everything that we do right throughout the project life cycle. But ultimately it's about information. It's about things that are going to be able to help us to make informed decisions, not just for operational expenditure but also capital expenditure. So it's about what we do right throughout the process in terms of creating value from information, from different types of data sets, from different types of pieces of information, whether it's things that are written down traditionally previously, whether it's from model-based information, but ultimately things that are out there in the environment as well that actually feed in to be able to make those informed decisions about future infrastructure. So it's about creating value from information, for want of a better way of describing it, Tris.
Thanks, Paul. Any other panelists like to add to that?
I'll give it a go, Tristan. Sorry, I should put my hand up. But it's building on Paul's thing. I mean, I think it's such an exciting time to be in a built environment, isn't it? That now actually, when we think about data actually is infrastructure. It's equally as important as our concrete or steel within there as well. I think increasingly we're seeing that convergence between cyber and physical. So it's hugely important. And for me, and I think our clients, when I think about being data-driven, it's actually making really well-informed decisions based upon data analytics. And I think it's also about, how we interpret our data as well. It's great we've got Stefan on in terms of, the future of AI within there as well. But often in terms of, we try to make it quite simple. We refer to these as our plain language questions. What are the data requirements to make better informed decisions? And actually, how can they make, better outcomes? But I think one of the big things as well, when we think about being data-driven, one of the things is, I think there's prerequisites to it, and that's a big part of what we do with our customers. Number one is about really good data collection. It's becoming much more real-time now through sensors and SCADA, but the right data that's going to be resilient, accurate, and clean. And I'm sure it's something that will come on to as well. It must be trustworthy, and it's something that's going to be accessible as well within there. And we've got to turn it into meaningful insights. But for me, being data-driven it's so important that if we're going to get value from infrastructure, we've got to see that it's equally as valuable as the physical parts of our built environment.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Martin, I'm going to come to you. Like I say, got 10 minutes more of your time, and I want to get the most that we can out of you. So good bits of information from Paul and Dave there, and I think that's leading towards organizations having a data strategy. So from your perspective, why is a data strategy so important?
So in terms of data strategy, I think it needs to be layered, Tris. So there's a data strategy which keeps you out of jail, basically, makes sure you're on top of your data, you're not compromising any legislation. So I think that's in place at the moment. And for me, I think it's more about a project data strategy and making sure at a project level, you've got the data in place so you can start to drive your portfolio and increase sort of project performance. So we've been working with Joe Jolly, the Environment Agency, on a project data strategy, which is saying what's the future, their future strategy, so they can start to leverage this big exhaust plume of data that's coming out the back of projects, and it starts to transform their management of their overall portfolio. So I think in terms of being data driven as well, it's probably worth thinking about Amazon versus something like Argos, for instance. In terms of Argos, theirs is a bolt-on model. So they've still got their physical stores. They're still sort of doing things like they always used to do it. They've bolt-on to their sort of solutions a web presence. If you think about Amazon, it's driven by data. It's a fundamental part of their business model is being data driven. And that's driven them into cloud services, and it's taken them into lots of different places because they started off with a data-driven sort of methodology. And I think that's where we're going to get to in the project delivery environments and where we start to drive organizations. So Joe Jolly's part of the Project Data Analytics Task Force, and that's something we set up last year. And in terms of that task force, it's starting to get us into places like the Public Accounts Committee. So a couple of weeks ago, we met with them and we talked about this big exhaust plume that's coming out the back of projects. And we're saying, if we don't start to leverage that exhaust plume, we've lost a lot of that experience, which is codified in data. So I think part of the project data strategy is to say, which bits of data do you need so you can answer the questions of the future? And it's not the questions today because we're not asking the right questions today. So those questions are things such as, so what's going to go wrong in a few weeks' time? I just need to get rid of that. In terms of my contingency, where's the best place to be investing my contingency? Things such as what's the most efficient path through a project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of that data is not in the right format today. It's not in the right places. It's spread across the supply chain, et cetera. So something else we're working on, so we've been doing it with Sir Robert McAlpine and Mace and Skanska and a few other companies, is this concept of a data trust. So the data trust is now established. That means we can independently steward data. So we get lots of data coming in from the supply chain. It's managed by the membership. So the membership dictate the rules in terms of the use of that data. And it means we can now start to pool data for the collective benefit. So if you think about that in terms of the Environment Agency, we can pick up cost data, schedule data, risk data, variance data, etc., and we can start to apply some advanced analytics onto that then. So what does that mean? It means we now start to disrupt AECOM's business as well, because a consulting business is driven by knowledge, etc. So it starts to disrupt the entire market end to end, from construction all the way through to the client. So I think we're looking at a major pivot point in terms of project delivery. And I think a lot of people aren't ready for this yet. And through the academy, through the Project Data Analytics Academy that we're running, we're trying to upskill people so they can see the light and start to innovate at the edge. And we've got 5 people through the Environment Agency. We're part of the academy at the moment. There's more people in the pipeline as well. So I think overall, we're looking at a major pivot in terms of the way that projects are sort of delivered. And I think it will be data driven, and it's not data driven in terms of an Argos model, it's data driven in terms of an Amazon model. I think that's the major pivot point that we'll see, Tris.
Thanks, Martin. That's really insightful. Sorry, I disappeared out there. Reece, you put your hand up.
Yeah, so sort of to pick up from that and some of Dave and Paul's points as well, the data strategy for me has to be around the outcomes that our clients are wanting, that we want from projects and from the overall services that are being provided. I think where we don't necessarily know what the outcomes of the future look like yet, it's setting in place the structures that allow us to answer those questions. But at the moment, collecting the right data that answers the right questions to give the right outcomes is absolutely key. And having a strategy that allows you to do that, especially over large, diverse organizations where we know that historically they haven't been connected up. They're collecting different types of information, and the language that they talk to each other in doesn't necessarily match or mesh there, means that the strategy has to be in place to allow them to do that in future. And I think we're seeing our clients start to understand that.
Absolutely, thanks, Reece. Stephanie, I want to come to you. The data quality has been mentioned a few times, and be interested to get your views on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's critical. So I completely concur with everything everyone already said, and David said it well in terms of consistency and availability. I think there's a large investment upstream in the preparation to create good data. So that consistency, whilst there are rules that we can all agree with and endorse, we're not necessarily achieving the outcomes in terms of creating that data to the requisite quality in the first place. And ultimately, this data is really there to serve processes and purposes. So it's our ability to access that, to train that data, to reutilize that data as we navigate our way through processes more rapidly. And the faster we can do things, the more opportunities there are to try out alternatives, and that is a critical component for the Environment Agency. If they've got a scheme that could be delivered in a number of different ways, how do they actually understand which way might be better? And that is run through the process with good quality information that they've either collected or created over time in order to make to test that.
Thank you.
Idea.
Thanks, Stefan. I think we grabbed that. I think we might be struggling to hear you a little bit. If you can move your mic, please. David, you've got a question.
Yeah, but pick up on one of the things that Reece said. I thought was hugely important. We're talking about outcomes and future scenarios. One of the things we've been working with clients in terms of our data and information management strategies is looking at what are the future scenarios that you want. It might be in terms of low carbon futures, sustainability. So one of the things we've been using is United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. It's a bit of a template to say, what does your future look like? What does that scenario look like? And then building a data strategy that works back. And one of the things that's quite interesting as well, what Martin said, is we're seeing clients that are looking at capital project data delivery strategies, but we're also seeing a lot of clients now clients that want to use data strategy for their existing estate because they want to get more out of existing infrastructure assets. They want to improve availability and capacity. So we're seeing clients that are going left to right in terms of new capital projects and programs, but equally, we're seeing lots of clients that are big infrastructure owners that are saying, we want to leverage more out of what we've got. So it's not just about operational performance, but actually from a societal outcome, actually, if I've got a big open data set, how is that going to help not just our business, but those that use our assets actually get more out of it as well? So I think we're seeing clients are coming two ways, go through left to right through the life cycle of capital projects and programs, but also reverse. We've got a huge estate. How do we digitize what we've got? How do we create an asset strategy using lots of existing that's maybe 20, 30, 40 years old, and how do we combine it? So I think the thing that I see at the end of the day is a good data strategy actually puts value on the physical assets. So getting the data strategy right is actually going to improve the actual commercial value of the physical asset as well.
That's great. Thank you, David. Before we go any further, Martin, I'm mindful of the time. I think you needed to leave us at 11. So thank you for your contribution. Really valuable, and it's I think got the debate started off quite nicely. So thank you for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of the day.
Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Cheers.
Thanks, Martin. We also have Matt Williams, who's I think from our audience. Matt, you've joined us. You need to come off mute, but I think you probably want to ask a question or make an observation. So.
Still on mute.
Yes.
Can we unmute?
Let's see if I can. We do find this a little bit at times.
Doesn't look like it.
No, Matt, I think that the technology's maybe failed us.
Yeah, Matt, you could always send a question to me and I can ask it for you. Yeah.
If you want to type it in the chat, Matt, we can put it to the panel. Okay, so talked there a lot about I think mainly focused on the challenges, starting to touch on some of the opportunities. Andreas, going to come to you. What do you see are the key opportunities for leveraging data and how the industry can move forward and how we use innovation and technology?
I think I quite agree with everything that was mentioned till now, but the other important thing about the data is that you can, up to a certain degree, start predicting also the future, move into the predictive analytics. So when you have your strategy and your data starts telling a story, whether you're just going to try, whether you're going towards achieving your strategy or not, that's where the data are coming handy on trying to see what changes can we do around day-to-day work to start predicting a change in our direction, to start moving the boat towards where we actually want to go. And these are the opportunities that they're arising with data, and especially with the increase of AI and machine learning. So it's not always about what we're currently doing, but we start focusing, for example, what we can do next. And just to give an example from my previous experience, which is quite relevant to what we're discussing here and related to data and collecting, I heard it quite a few times that we shouldn't be collecting all the data. We should collect just a few data, what we need. Especially when it comes to floods, for example, we have, for example, weather data that goes up to 100 or 200 years from the different weather stations, which currently do help us build models and with machine learning to actually build better and more accurate models of predict, for example, floods or predicting different weather events that we wouldn't be able if we haven't collected all this data. So start predicting the future based on all this historic data that we have collected.
Okay, thanks, Andreas. Tris, Harvey-Rice, going to come over to you, and then I'll come to you, Stefan. Tris, you're working on a big project for the Environment Agency, and you've done similar things for other clients. A lot of opportunity there, lots of challenges. Do you want to talk us through your views on it?
Sure. So I think the work we've been doing with the Environment Agency, the step forward around that has been that we're integrating cost and carbon data. So traditionally and historically, they've been dealt with in separate silos. Obviously wanting to get a cost prediction for a given investment and a carbon prediction, two teams interpreting the scope their own ways, and having to extract different details from the information available to come up with their calculations. And we've developed the system and data and processes that will drive both outputs from one single version of the truth, one set of project scope via established methodologies, and it will align with the ISO and PAS standards, which is obviously a huge effort reduction, but also it's driving that consistency. So you know that the valuations are exactly aligned to the actual scope that's being developed. And it's just one example of how increasing data availability and actual management of that data. So by having it in the right structures, aligned to the right breakdowns, and aligned to the right standards, we can integrate processes, get a much more efficient process and a more accurate outcome.
So we've talked to data quality, Tris, and how do we make sure we maintain that as we go? Because it's good to create a tool, and I think the tool that you and the team are creating is going to be fantastic for the Environment Agency and industry leading. But how do we maintain things? What's the key there?
So one of the people in my team actually did an article recently around data governance, and through some of the research that we've been doing with water companies in using the historic data, like Andreas was just mentioning, we found that one of the key issues coming out was actually the quality and consistency of that data. So historically, it's been something that takes a lot of effort to cleanse your data, make it consistent. You have to put that effort in up front to capture quite precisely and prescriptively what data you want. And advancing technology, especially around machine learning and things and big data tools, they allow us to deal with less precise data or to cope with more variability in that data and still extract trends and information from it. But nonetheless, having that historical data set, which may not actually serve the purposes you want now, and may still have a lot of gaps in it or errors, inconsistencies for all sorts of reasons, right down to the people involved in the supply chain at various points, just not having the same processes or the same understanding even of what it is they're capturing. All these different reasons, you get a lot of inconsistency in the data. Ultimately, that's going to impact the results of what you're trying to do with it. So having a top-down data governance strategy can help alleviate all of those sorts of challenges. So you're identifying upfront what data do you actually want, where is it worth focusing the effort, how is it going to be captured, is everybody involved absolutely clear what it is they're doing, what they're capturing and how much of that can be automated. There's all of these different angles and steps along the way that can improve the data quality that you're capturing.
Okay, thanks, Tris. Stefan, I think you had your hand up.
I did. Hopefully you can hear me slightly better this time.
Yeah.
So, I think the work that Tris has done is one of the things is to start building up templates, and with that you end up assuring the information quality. But there's no one solution. It's a nice to have to control the creation of the data and end up with the consistency. But I think a strategy around checking that what you have just created is still conformant, whether it's coming from external third parties or even the stuff that you've created yourself. And at the point that you then have that consistency, then you can play tunes, as Andreas has suggested, to do predictions. But the other thing that data provides us with is the opportunity to actually work with far larger scales of data. So if you think about a program of work, which inevitably is part of every Environment Agency job, planning is working at a resolution, a very low resolution. So 400 tasks make up a program of work and not a task more or less. But in this new world, we can actually generate the activities at an atomic scale. So every single element that we implement on an EA project can have its own start and finish date, and just its context in three-dimensional space with a finish and start date, with all of the other objects around it having the same. That provides us with information that we might not yet really understand how we can benefit from its use in the future, but it's working at a level of detail that can only benefit us in the future. Pointing, going back to Andreas's point about limiting what we collect. You didn't make that point, Andreas, you were arguing against, and I completely concur that we shouldn't worry too much about the amount of data that we're collecting, really only its consistency, and we'll learn how to make better use of it in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan. Paul, I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with Stefan. I think one of the things that we've been working with Environment Agency very closely on Tris is what does the data mean to the individuals, the different personas, people in the organization. What's the importance of what you're collecting? What are you collecting? Why are we collecting it? What we're going to use? And helping to that understanding, changing the behaviours, learning about it, the relevance to the organisation at multiple levels, but also, quite frankly, as well, creating certainty that what you're creating, what you're using, what you're reporting, you can make informed decisions from it as well. There's that much data out there today, from it, whether it's social media, whether it's GIS, whether it's water information, some of the, what Andreas was talking about there, weather, for example, and it's making people at different levels, at different layers, to feel comfortable with that approach, and that you can use it successfully. But it is good, clean data. It's got the right structure. It's been organized in the right data sets with the right metadata, with the right information. So it's what is being surfaced, then you can make informed decisions and you have certainty around that information. But having a really good approach, really clean data, and there's some information out there, from the government in terms of data is increasing, in organizations by about 40% a year, and that's just going to continue to grow. So it's having good, clean data, but to be able to make decisions from it and having certainty what you're using is right and is relevant and will help the organization.
Thanks, Paul. Reece, you had your hand up?
Yeah, to sort of just to follow on from Andreas and Stefan's point around the volume of data that we collect and trying to collect all the data, I think one of the challenges that we have to be aware of is that around certain activities, there is quite a large cost associated with collecting that data as well. Cost in terms of individuals' time to do it, cost in terms of systems to set us up in the right place to be able to collect that data. But with that, there's a huge opportunity as well with the technology that we see coming forward. So some of the bits that Stefan mentioned around, how do we tag different things as they're moving through, so it's not the job of the QS at the end of a project to suddenly bring all the cost data together. How do we know what comes onto site and off site in a centralized way, rather than needing someone with a clipboard to write it down, to then have that information transcribed into a system, to then have the information uploaded to something else and then processed. So I think although we want to collect as much data as we can to answer our questions, we've got to help our clients have the right systems and opportunities to do that in a way that isn't going to affect negatively on the other outcomes of the projects they're looking for.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, just building on some of the colleagues' comments, especially as Paul said, there's huge amounts of different data collection points out there now, from real-time sensor data, geospatial, social media. But I think we probably as a team all recognise that the real value comes when we start to share data, and not within a domain, but across domains within there. And I think one of the things we are still seeing, I think collectively, there's a lack of coordination of data within infrastructure sectors, and probably more so across sectors as well. And I think when we think about data strategy, it's thinking even beyond organizations. And we heard Andreas talking about, weather data and everything. But one of the things I think we've collectively got to think about is that industry leadership, things like ontologies, security, that are going to enable, greater data sharing within there as well. So I still think one of the biggest challenges, and it's one that we're being called upon a lot of the time now, is to help in terms of interoperability. How do we start to connect all these different data sets together? And it comes often to technologies as well. We're often using technologies with clients, that want to improve their existing infrastructure that's maybe 10, 20 years old. I use the term, it's been homebrewed. An IT department's built an asset registry system over, 20 years, and we're still having to connect into there as well. So I'd be quite interested as well, how big is the interoperability challenge? And do we have to collectively, as a built environment, take coordination across domains? I think still is a big question within there. But at the same time, once we get that data sharing across sectors and domains, I think we've got a huge value in terms of infrastructure performance.
Brilliant. Thanks, David. Stefan, we'll come to you. Then we've got some questions in the Q&A that we'll go through. So, Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to Dave's point, I think interoperability is key, and the world is coming towards interoperability in a way that couldn't have been imagined 20 years ago. So systems now are built as microservices. The functions are atomic. They're scalable, so you can run multiple instances of them, and the interfaces into them are very straightforward and clean. Applications these days are made up effectively of services for which every single service has an API. So theoretically, connecting those things together, it becomes super easy. And I've had 2 conversations in the last 48 hours about leveraging systems that we've built into third-party larger applications, and actually, it's just so simple it could almost be achieved in 48 hours. So, sorry, I'll stop there.
That's fine. Thanks, Stefan. So we have got a few questions in the Q&A. We had a very good one from Paul Hogan that I'm going to leave a little bit to the end about how the EA can use data for their capital program. But we've got some other ones. There's one from Charlie Thompson. So what are your views on the balance between dictating data specifications and agnostic data collection? So collect once, use many times. Andreas, just so you put your hand up. So over to you for that one.
Yes, I have seen that question. I'm quite fond of the second part of the agnostic data collection. And as I usually say to Paul when discussing data, I've tried to be data agnostic and industry agnostic. So what data we're using in one industry, we should be using them in others. We had examples that we're currently using, for example, with CO2 emissions in some of our projects. We're using data from a completely different industry that they're collecting. So it's more about, for every single project that you're going to run in the future, it's highly likely that the standards you would expect from the same data set will be different. So collecting in an agnostic way the data and then being able to process them, most of the new technologies and tools do enable us to do that on kind of quick way. We're always going to have to spend some time on the data quality because different projects are going to require different approaches, but generally quite fond of the as agnostic as possible, store them, which is cheap, and then process them per project.
Okay. Thanks, Andreas. And also one from Terry Fuller. Thanks for this, Terry. How do we improve the amount of post-project data gathering, often forgotten as we move on to the next project? I'm going to ask Tristan Reese to tackle this one, because I think it probably ties in nicely with the work and probably some of your experiences from the cost and carbon tool you're developing.
Sure. So I think it's picking up slightly on some of the points that have just been made, which I absolutely agree with, around data sharing and getting that more collaborative approach to it, even within an organization. So again, looking back historically, data tends to be managed in silos, and each part of the project delivery process will handle its own data that it needs for what it does. And that's understandably evolved over time without too much of looking over the fence to what's up and downstream. And then what we're seeing is that throughout the end-to-end delivery process, all of those stages start to converge and realize, well, actually, if I set up my data at the front end with consideration of what I want to get out the back end, like collecting the actuals from delivery, then I can actually make that process much more successful. And then the next step change, which David touched on, is when you start getting comfortable with sharing that data externally, and things like Martin's data trust, where you're contributing what you've collected to a central pool. There's also got external data in, and then you can start getting the benefits of all of that external information as well. And again, it's all driven by doing it consistently, doing it in a way that you can actually make use of all the new information.
Yeah. Thanks, Reese. Reese, did you want to add anything to that? And then we'll come to you, Dave.
It's also about the points at which data is transferred. So we know that as materials move around sites, as finances move between different areas, we have these transfer points where information is created as a result of something changing between one spreadsheet and another, between a HGV arriving on site or not. And it's identifying those and being able to capture those points in a more automated way, rather than having a manual interaction in order to capture that data. And I think that we're seeing certain case studies come through with some of that information, and that will be a step change when clients like the EA are able to see that information go through those different points.
Thanks, Rhys. Dave, you want to contribute?
Yeah, I was going to build upon both Tristan and Rhys's points as well. I think it's a great question. I think what we've seen as an industry, we've got quite good at, structured information and data exchanges during the capital life cycle, especially during, from the design and construct. But, we get to that point where we go through the project handover and we have one big data exchange that populates CAFM systems, asset registers, and then does it get forgotten? I think for us, one of the big things that's really helping us and our clients is soft landings. A soft landings process where we're thinking about not just post-doc evaluation for 3 years, but actually creating a continuous, if you like, a continuum of data right the way through. Thinking about what do we need it for in terms of, or it might be in terms of statutory compliance, regular pulse checks on there, in terms of repair before fail. So we're working with a lot of clients now. We're kind of extending what was soft landings, but actually looking at real, use cases for data in the operational stages. And it's tying right into our digital twin strategy. So we had soft landings, it was regular pulse checks, if you like, it was often for clients yearly, but now it's something that we've got much more dynamic data. But one of the things we make sure is we've got a real strategy for operational data capture and use and making sure that we're feeding it as well. Now, it always comes back to proportionality. Some of it is real time. Some of it might be through, even digital photogrammetry at various points as well within there. But having a clear structure and building upon soft landings is really helping us. That plus digital twinning is helping us start with that structure into data gathering in terms of that operational life cycle.
Thanks, Dave. Stefan, just want to get your input here. Have you got any particular tools or any technology that you're working on that would actually help that capturing process? I mean, I know probably why Terry's asked that question, and from my own experience of working on environment agency projects and other client projects, it is all that stuff that you get to the end and then you want to move on to the next project and certain things don't get picked up. So have you got any views on it? Have we lost Stefan?
Sorry.
Sorry, go on, Stefan, you're back.
No, so I think the important thing is to remove friction from these processes. And I think, to David's point about and Rhys's point about information handovers, I think they have to be prepared in advance, and I think there's too much, contemplation of those information handovers at too late a point in the process, and they become an encumbrance rather than a help. So what we are doing more and more of is to build pipelines that don't wait around for someone to push a button or hand over information. We go and get the information and then push it through a pipeline and just try to do as much as we can to support the downstream users through manipulation and transformation. And there are great tools out there, as Andreas said, and I think Tristan said, to clean data and prepare it for its next downstream use. So it's really trying to anticipate, the future requirements of those stakeholders that we interact with. And I think traditionally, I think Tristan's point about people working in silos and really not caring what the downstream effect of a bad information handover was. I think the industries like and organisations like the Environment Agency are starting to take control and actually assert the need for those information handovers to be successful, and not allowing the vagaries of the industry to corrupt that anymore. I think it's gone beyond acceptable these days, which I think is great, and will push everything forwards.
Brilliant, thanks, Stefan. So got a few more questions here. One from Susie Clark, and it's the most useful data to the EA would presumably relate to the success of a flood resilience project after it is completed. perhaps for the next few years. How does that fit? And then we've got an additional thing of how do we define success? And we've probably just touched on some of those aspects. Is there anything anyone else would like to add to answer Susie's question?
I'm not close to the EA, but I've had sufficient interactions with Tristan to understand a bit. But I think, the outcome of remediation works in terms of the outcomes for a population not getting flooded or whatever it might be, is obviously a measure of success, but actually how much investment had to be put into that solution is also a contributing factor. So one thing can't be looked at in isolation of the others, and they have to be taken in context. If it costs you 20 million quid to prevent that flood versus £100,000, then one could be doing more successful than the other. So it's not just a blind outcome at any cost.
Okay, Reese.
How you define the success of these projects often comes down to what's set out in the business case for doing that project in the first place. So Stefan's point around the cost associated with it, depending on how many properties you've managed to defend, could be one metric. But we know that if you define things in that way, it creates a decision-making process which aims for low-hanging fruit first and doesn't necessarily protect others because it will cost more to do so, even though it is still necessary as part of what the EA needs to do. So I think when we talk about the useful data against it, it's how do we, for each of the business cases, is it in the business case itself how they're planning to collect the data afterwards in order to support the success of the project that they've put forwards? And in terms of reusing that data in future, what does that data mean to help better make decisions in future? And if it's well defined, that can be used. If it's vague, that's where I think it becomes far less useful.
Cool, thank you, Reese. So we're getting some good questions in here. There's a couple here around the availability of data. So AECOM help to make data available and be translated into data that can be shared with the public. And similar sort of vein is how do we ensure that data collected on publicly funded projects is made freely available to any and all potential users? So much data is still hidden, in inverted commas, within consultancy stroke the EA. So who'd like to tackle those? Andreas, I think you had your hand up, and then Tris, we'll come to you.
Yes, I just want to say that this is not a new challenge or a new problem that we have. It happened quite often with in the past, and there's some great examples out there of agencies publishing the data, like the Polish UK or the Scottish government publishing all the data, whether they come from consultancies or from their own data collection. And we're supporting in different projects our customers and some agencies to make this data available, because it is a benefit for everyone, and for innovation perspective, this data to be publicly available. So I think that Trish will confirm that we're doing our best to make them available when it's possible, but it's most of the data, as far as I'm aware, we do not really own them. They're owned by the different agencies also.
Yeah, I totally agree, Andreas. And this, for me, actually goes right back to the start, and when Martin mentioned about Amazon versus Argos and that being data-driven versus doing something as a bolt-on. I think, the Amazon is an IT company. It's not a retail company. And similarly, Tesla is a technology company. It's not a car company. They are founded upon digital and data capability. And I think across all industries, the balance is shifting over to that recognition that it's actually more beneficial to be more open with your data and have access to wider data sets, rather than jealousy guarding it and saying, no, it's commercially valuable. I've got to hold on to it, and this is where we get our value from, just what we possess. because inherently you're trying to use that data, you're trying to produce outputs with it while almost not revealing it, and that in itself can be a challenge. So coming back to one of the points in the question, you have to find ways to make it available that does protect the confidentiality where you have to. Obviously there's some things you just can't get away from, but that doesn't mean do nothing. It just means find the appropriate way of anonymizing, aggregating, so that it can still be put to the greater good, because everybody benefits. And trying to avoid that, I think, ends up with nobody benefits, including the organisations holding on to their data.
Okay, yeah, David, can I bring you in there?
Yeah, I would concur. One of the things we're doing with our clients as part of the data strategy is, if they are thinking about publishing something as open data, is to actually put it through a shaker table, a series of almost filters and tests, and it's probably value based. You know, one of the first things we say, you know, it's a series of tests on the data. Number one, you know, is it going to be ethical? You know, is it going to be, you know, it's not going to be discriminatory within there? Does it have clear purpose? Is it going to give the end users value and insight? Is it trustworthy? You know, has it got a quality check before we put it out of it? And actually, who's going to curate the data as well? You know, it's great putting all the data out, but make sure there's like curation on it. Is it something that is proportionate as well to, you know, the question it's answering? And so one of the things we're doing is just helping clients put, you know, a bit of a test before they push open data out, just to make sure, you know, how does it, you know, tick against each of those ones as well within there. And I think one of the big things we're seeing is still the whole part around about data curation, which starts to build us into that world of, you know, data skills, you know, the capability and capacity in the market, and what that means as well for, especially, you know, new entrants into the sector. And I think there's great opportunities to be had as well.
Okay, thanks, David. So I'm going to bring us back to our first question that we had raised from Paul Hogan. And it's any thoughts on how data and technology can be used to enable the EA to deliver their new capital budget allowance, which was double the previous, and aligned increased program over the next 5 to 6 years. Who wants to go first on that one? Tris, and then we'll come to.
Yeah, so I perhaps have to be a bit careful what I can talk about around it. Obviously, the CCT project, a large part of that was about making the processes around decision making more efficient and to shorten the time taken to get work into contract and actually get that huge program into the hands of the deliverers and getting the assets constructed. It's not the only initiative by far, but it's one of a number of ones all around their digital asset management capability program. So in terms of what the EA can do, I think they're doing a lot working there. We're aware of that, and the CCT is just one example.
Okay, thanks, Tris. Paul, over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tris. I think one of the things that we see with quite a lot of organizations is that they try and digitize traditional models, you know, so, you know, the traditional way of working, the traditional way that, you know, the business is set up, you know, so, you know, there's a, you know, and you can't digitize traditional, you know, business models or the way that organizations have worked before. And, you know, so what you need to do is, you know, look at your processes, and it's not just about the digital processes or data, you know, it's about how, you know, teams, you know, work, you know, how it relates to them in terms of their day-to-day role. And, you know, so at an organizational level, you need to look at all of your processes and how digital and data is going to impact on that and do it a different way. You know, you need to look at different types of contract models as well, you know, different business model, you know, how organizations share together, because ultimately we're all there to deliver successfully for our clients and collectively as one organization. You know, so you need to look at, you know, holistically all of the processes wrapped around that, particularly the contract models, but not try to digitize the traditional ways of doing things. And I'll let some of my other colleagues you know, maybe challenge some of that as well.
Dave.
Yeah, one of the things we're seeing, you know, lots of our clients are actually thinking about this as a great opportunity to actually choose how we procure. You know, it's going away from, you know, very deterministic models to actually value-based procurement, and have a good upfront data model. We can put it into various value toolkits, you know, to actually help make sure that the value profile is optimized. So it's not always about reducing, the capital, but actually looking at all the different, from human capital to natural capitals, and using data modeling right at the very beginning to look at, how do we make sure that we get the best value profile that's going to meet a capital solution and a capital budget. So it lets us think about different, and it starts, as Paul said, think about new ways of procuring things, which I think is going to bring real value and better outcomes.
Okay, would anyone else like to add to that? Stefan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's all about the efficiency of delivery and ultimately for the EA to be able to assess the different options that they've got in front of them over the next 5 years, where they can spend money to make those best choices. And as a consultant, our only purpose in life is to deliver the optimal solution for a client. So whatever a client decides is their preference, it's up to us to deliver that. So we need to build the tools that enable us to do that in the most efficient and meaningful way possible. And part of that is to leverage historical knowledge, which is what effectively Tristan is ending up doing, building up templates of that can then be driven through the design process into procurement more rapidly. And I think so it's just a continuation of trying to do that more and more, never being satisfied that we've exhausted our efforts in that area.
Okay, thanks everyone. Fiona, I've noticed you joined us on the screen. I'm not sure if you're aware. If you wanted to ask a question, feel free to come off mute. I can. We're fairly near neighbours, so I can see the sun is shining nicely over Limpston this morning. So welcome to the discussion. And like I say, if you want to join the chat, then please feel free to come off mute. We've got just under 10 minutes left. One of the things here was around the challenges facing the industry, and I think something that's been talked about and is still relevant, and actually is very relevant, is the skills shortage. And I think from perspective, I've got 2 teenage sons. One's going to start their A levels in September. The other one's starting their GCSEs, both into maths and computer science and all that sort of stuff. So I'm just interested to hear from you about what advice you would give to someone who's thinking of embarking on a career in digital and data, and what opportunities there are available to them. So I'm going to go to you first, Paul.
Thanks, Tristan. So we're working very closely with all the colleges and universities, and it's an interesting time. Just taking a step back, Tristan, I think one of the things that we do have to do is attract people to want to come to work for this industry as well. Make this industry, it is an exciting industry, but showcase there are opportunities for those younger folk in data and digital, and because we're all looking for the same types of talent, or out there trying to get the same types of talent. But the Googles and the Facebooks and the LinkedIns, they can all attract those types of folk much more than we can. So what can we as an industry do to set those career paths up, set those opportunities up, make it attractive, show that we are data and digital driven. And and it's not just people coming through universities, but also apprenticeships. Looking at different types of schemes, different types of ways to help and educate those folk. And it's been one of the particular challenges that we've had during COVID and lockdown is the younger graduates, younger apprentices coming through and not being able to sit beside an expert or an engineer or somebody who's been in the industry 20 years to get that knowledge and that sharing. We continually look at different ways that we can help to bring them through. But just at a high level, quite truthfully, what we need to do is show that we are data digital driven. It's a great industry, great opportunities, exciting times, and we want and need those younger folk to come through, but we need to help them too to get them upskilled as well.
Excellent, thanks, Paul. David.
Yeah, I was going to tell, but a bit like you, Tristan, probably a personal story. My daughter's 15, and she's doing a modern day apprenticeship in civil engineering. I asked her the question, why did you decide to do it? Obviously, I thought it was because she saw me as a great role model. But apparently that was not the main reason. There's probably, looking back. So number one, she saw some great role models. She saw, lots of, young people doing really diverse jobs in construction that she thought were pretty cool and pretty relevant. So actually having good, strong role models that demonstrate diversity of what we do, I think is hugely important. But also, I don't think we should be as apologetic as well. One of the things, I said to her was, what else? She said, I remember when I was a child down the Institute of Civil Engineering with me, years back. She saw all these cool stuff that we're doing that was going to improve society, for building bridges and major infrastructure. And then she coupled these two things in her head of actually doing cool digital stuff, but actually we create amazing things as well. And I think if we can capture imaginations, but also at the same time, I think we've got to, parents, guardians, carers, we demonstrate that what we do is a really valued profession within there. It's equally up there with, medical professions within there. So we need to shine a light on what we're doing and show the career opportunities for young people as well. And people come in different ways. It might be coming in for a degree, but also the value of technical courses and modern day apprentices as well, I think is hugely important.
Absolutely. Andreas, thank you, David.
So joining, and back to what Paul was saying, that I joined this industry without an engineering background and focusing more on the data science, and the advantage of this industry compared to any other data science jobs that I had in the past is you're working with data sets that usually you wouldn't have access to any other industry. So yes, we're talking about Facebook, LinkedIn, Google, etc., which it's usually mostly about text, maybe some images, maybe some tabular data. When we are working on civil infrastructure with designs, try to automate design, something that you wouldn't be able to do anywhere else. And it's because it's so early on the journey, it's so exciting also try to automate things that you wouldn't find in any of the big tech companies. And I think that's the excitement of the industry now. Thanks,
Andreas. Stefan and Reese, if I could just quickly get input from yourselves. So Stefan, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so I have to agree with everything everyone else has said, and I think the only thing that I can add to that is my entry into I didn't formally enter into the construction industry purposefully. I did it by accident, but the thing that I've observed is it's an industry that has lots of problems to solve, and so for anybody who likes problem solving, the construction sector is absolutely the right place to be. Lots of opportunities to really make an impact on the world.
Brilliant, thanks, Stefan. And Reese, if I can just quickly get an input from yourself.
So I was just going to add, I think it's about the recognition of data science and data-driven working as a profession in and of itself, so that when we're talking to younger individuals, it's not, I want to become a lawyer, I want to become a banker, I want to become an engineer. The terminology around what we use for that sort of profession becomes, I want to do this because I can see it's recognised. So I think the area is developing into that. I don't think it's there yet, partly because we haven't got a very good sort of job title for it yet. I don't think data scientist is probably the right one. But when we have that, it will become a really engaging area for people.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a couple of minutes away from the end of our hour. Probably a good time to wrap up. Has anyone got any of the panel got any last things they'd like to add?
So very quick to append to what Reese was just saying and around getting into the industry, it's actually a really tough one because it's like the rate of change is just accelerating so much. And obviously the next thing coming over the horizon is quantum computing, where that's really chucking the rule book out the window on all the traditional stuff around how, computing theory, it's the very foundation of it, it becomes probabilistic. So what that means for data and the way that we manage data and how we apply these tools is going to be very interesting to see.
Okay, good stuff. Paul, I've got about 10 seconds for you, I think, if you can manage that.
Just very quickly, Tristan, I think just to sum up, this is a great opportunity and now's the time to do it, but we all have to do it together, so let's take the opportunity.
Okay, brilliant. Well, listen, we're at the end of our hour, so I just want to say thank you for everyone who's joined us, and particularly those who've interacted through the Q&A. I hope we've covered it. Maybe one or two questions we haven't done, so we'll try and answer those afterwards. But some good questions posed. And lastly, thank you to the panel for giving your time this morning and giving your valued insights and experience. And I know you'll be happy to take any follow-up questions. I think Hannah's very kindly put Tris Harvey-Rice's email address in the chat, but you can contact us all either through the event or through LinkedIn and other means. Thank you very much to the panel this morning. It's been really insightful. So thanks, and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Take care.
Bye.